We're expecting a good number of people today. I'm sure people will be joining us a little bit kind of as soon as they can, rushing out of meetings maybe, but we will start when my clock says 2 minutes past. So we'll spend just another minute before we get going. We've got a really interesting webinar today that I hope you will find useful. Welcome to people as you are arriving. We'll be starting in about half a minute as people join us, and we'll get going and introduce what we're doing today. But welcome to this webinar being run by the Landscape Institute in Scotland. Okay, my clock says 2 minutes past 12, so we will get started. Welcome to this webinar, The Landscape of Outdoor Learning, a response to the 1,140 hours in the early years in Scotland. This webinar is being hosted by the Landscape Institute Scotland. And if you want to ask any questions through the webinar, we ask that you use the question and answer, the Q&A box. We won't be checking the chat box for questions, so if you've got a specific question, please do put it in the Q&A. There will be time at the end of the session to run through those. So if you've got other questions, there'll be people kind of monitoring that box, so please do use it. And we hope you find this webinar useful. I'm just going to start by telling you who I am. My name is Mary Jackson. I work for Learning Through Landscapes, which is the National School Grounds charity for the UK. I'm Head of Education and Communities, and my background is that I am a chartered landscape architect, but I'm also a teacher. So where else do I work but for a charity that deals with school grounds? So Learning Through Landscapes, as I say, National School Grounds charity. We're here to support schools and those who work with them, including landscape architects, through training, through events, through projects. And right at the end, I will tell you about one event that is coming up because it's specifically in Scotland and something that you might be interested in. Just to talk about this this new aspect of the early years provision in Scotland. This was meant to start in 2020, the entitlement to 1,140 hours a year for 3- and 4-year-olds in Scotland and some 2-year-olds too. That has been delayed until August 2021, but things are well underway, and we will hear more about how that's going and how that impacts on settings as we go through. And that expansion is really there to support children, but also to support their families as well, especially the most vulnerable children. We know how important a good start is, how that early years support is, and so that's why this has been put in place. But why is outdoor learning and play so important, just for all children, really? And I love this definition. I will read it out. Play has been described as what children and young people do when they're not being told what to do by adults. And maybe we think that early year settings in schools, children get a lot of being told what to do. Well, play is really, really important all the way through that education of a child, but it is particularly important in the early years because play is how young children learn. We often kind of relate this maybe to how animals learn. We see animals playing, baby animals playing, and it's exactly the same for children. So for young children, that is how they learn. But it's also really important to say, and I think a lot of people have realised this during the pandemic, that the natural environment and being out in the open, being outside, is really, really important for all of our mental health. So that's the children in the settings, but it's also the staff as well. But it can also help with things like physical health and mental health as well. So it's really important to ensure that children get outside. And the role of the landscape architect is really important, and we will obviously learn about that as we go through. I'm soon going to introduce you to our 4 speakers, and we have 2 landscape architects within our speakers and 2 early years professionals. And so when you listen in particular to the landscape architect, I've kind of picked out 4 things that's worth kind of focusing on while we go through this. And first of all is working out how you understand the needs of your clients. And who is the client? I'm just going to put that question there. I'm not going to define that in any way, but I want you to think about who is the client if you're designing for an early years setting. Next thing is to really understand what it is the practitioners are trying to achieve in a setting. So to understand the early years framework in Scotland, understand that early years curriculum is also really important. You need to be able to design a space that enables that curriculum to flourish and be delivered well. So again, look out for that in the presentations. I always think the landscape architect has a role to stretch the imagination of the client. Often people only know what they have seen before, and a landscape architect has that creativity and that imagination and desire to push the boundaries, I hope, and to think a little bit more about what is possible rather than what maybe the first reaction and the first response of the client is. And obviously, it's really important that the landscape architect produces a safe environment for children to spend time in, but it's also an effective environment. So our 4 speakers today. We're going to be starting with Felicity, and I'll introduce Felicity in a moment. She's Director of Landscape Architecture at URS. And is an award-winning designer, and I will introduce her properly in just a moment because she's going to be our first speaker. Natalie Murray, as you can see, is Technical Director of Landscape Architecture at Wardle Armstrong. I'm pleased to say she is also one of our networks. So at Learning Through Landscapes, we train and accredit people to work with us on projects and with schools and settings, and Natalie is part of that network. And then Catherine and Elsie are early years development officers at West Lothian Council. So they will very much be bringing their different perspective into the conversation today. So I'm just going to introduce Felicity. Felicity, as I said, is an award-winning and innovative landscape architect, and she's going to talk really about the role of good design in preschool play spaces, and also how you make spaces really appealing to children and to adults practitioners as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Felicity.
Thank you, Mary. Welcome, everybody. Just bear with me while I'm not done a lot of webinars and just make sure that I've got this right. Nope. Right, everybody see that properly? Thank you very much. I want to talk about early years design in the context of landscape architecture as a whole, and really because I think that early years design is a microcosm of everything that we do as landscape architects. It embodies all the things that we learn at university and throughout practice, and it can be seen as a slightly niche, perhaps not terribly glamorous part of our world of design, but I'm hoping that by the end of my talk you might change your minds a little bit about that. So I'm Felicity Steers. I'm a director at URTS Landscape Architects. URTS is a very design-based landscape architect. We don't do very much on the large-scale LVIA, wind farm, all that kind of stuff. We're very, very much focused on building places. These are some places that we've built in recent years, and we pride ourselves on being a sort of whole life landscape architect. So projects include hospitals, including maternity hospitals, early years nurseries, and then hospices and everything through to crematoria. And these projects show Mid Park Hospital, the new seafront in Dunoon, and the Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice. So you can see that we are very, very much interested in aesthetics and in building things really well. And this is really important, I think, in early years, which traditionally has been a world of woven willow, although I love woven willow, old car tyres, which I hate, and pallets. And I just think our children deserve a lot better. And I think the growing interest in this field demonstrates that everybody's starting to think that. And there's a place for all types of environment within early years. I'm also a mum. These are my two youngest children, and I try and get them outside all the time. And in Scotland, we have a legacy of absolutely wonderful wild landscapes, but our built environments tend to be quite poor. And I'm coming at it from the point of view of being a country kid myself. I grew up in rural Somerset, although I've been in Scotland all my adult life. And this is my old primary school in Shoscombe in Somerset. And so I grew up playing in that hedge, which you can see at the back of the photo. Early years design is about people and place. It's also very much about environmental psychology. And I was very lucky to be taught several years of environmental psychology at Edinburgh College of Art. It comes into all my work, but perhaps more than anything in early years design. But if you're working within, particularly within the 1140 expansion programme, you need to be also very aware of pedagogy, environment, politics, and also architecture. So as I say, a microcosm of everything that we do as landscape architects. A starting point is people, and the obvious people that we are working for are the tiny ones. And I quite often borrow a quote from somebody else's talk that I saw. You need to say, look at me, I'm only wee. You are working for somebody who perhaps is only 2 foot tall, and you have to change the whole scale and setting in which you're working. And this is a lovely, delightful challenge because you can play fantastically with scale when you're working in early years. But we're also working for people of all ages. Staff who work in early years facilities are all the way through from teenagers to retirement age, and you are designing for a whole community of people, including parents and carers and people coming in to teach, and very often including adjacent schools. And these are environments that might well be used for other purposes in the evening. So it's an incredibly adaptable and flexible sort of set of requirements, and design skills need to be really honed for that. Place is incredibly important too. So very often schools and nurseries have immense meaning for the people who are living and using them. Sometimes they even went there themselves as children. And they're very, very diverse. So you get really incredibly historic settings, very wild settings, and settings that are anywhere in between. Environmental psychology and the whole thing about habitat theory and designing places that have prospect and refuge and shelter and variety of scale, all of this comes into play, and you can be incredibly playful. Elevation, changes in level, things you can sit in, things you can sit on, places to go under, all of that is really important. So these are very, very rich spaces, or they should be. There's an immense amount of pedagogy around this. It's written about from all kinds of different perspectives, and people like different theories. I really like David Sobel's Principles of Natural Play, which was written in 2011, and I'd recommend that as a really good read. He talks about adventure and fantasy and imagination, special places, and it really encompasses the world of environmental psychology, but through a different sort of starting point. For me, the fundamental basis for designing in education comes from a story I was told when I was a student in America. And we were looking at a primary school that had been designed by Eero Saarinen in Indiana. And he had come in and looked at previous designs for the school and said, well, you know, they're okay, but where does the lion jump in through the window? And this thing about the leap of imagination, the leap of faith, the element of surprise, of shock, this thing about a lion jumping in through the window has stayed with me my whole career. And I try and do it for every project, but for early years stuff, you can really, really work hard at getting that lion jumping. And it's a fantastic starting point for me personally in this design. process. Environment is important in terms of, you know, designing a great environment and being very environmental and sustainable. And we are working with SUDS and IGI and native plants, all of that stuff. But there's also a bigger context to it with early years. And I think Celia Tennant puts this really, really well when she says that there are wider benefits for society here, that we need a generation of children that will grow up not just familiar with the outdoors, but passionate about it, a generation that love and understand the world around them. If we want a future at all, we need that to be the case. And I think that this is an incredibly important project, the 1140 hours, and it is a sea change for Scotland, and in terms of getting our children outside and protecting our future as a country. And so this is a very political project, and the Scottish Government have invested a vast amount of money into the early years provision, and they have every intention of rolling this out through the rest of the education, right through to tertiary education. This is a project about social mobility. It's about closing the attainment gap. It's about protecting the most vulnerable in our society and making sure that they have the chances that everybody else has. And I'm immensely proud to be part of this, what is really a big social experiment, and which I hope will have enormous positive benefits over the next decades. Architecture is also important, and within the work that I've been doing, as you can see, as you will see, there's a massive range of architecture, and how you deal with that as a landscape architect is always a challenge. I've been lucky to work with wonderful architects such as Malcolm Fraser when I was doing Arcadia Nursery for Edinburgh University, which is this photograph. But more recently, with the 1140 expansion, you're sometimes dealing with incredibly challenging environments like the yards around Victorian primary schools, or 1950s, 1960s buildings that are perhaps nearing the end of their lifespan, where the external areas have been neglected or poorly organically designed over many years. So great and interesting challenges there. I wanted to talk a bit about grown-ups, because these are places where many grown-ups work, and very often they are women. And I'm a staunch feminist, so I believe in providing women with the very best environments to do their jobs. It's really important because staff need to enjoy their job. Anybody needs to enjoy their job. If your environment doesn't work for you, it makes it very difficult. So places, these are workspaces, and they need to be comfortable and fit for purpose for the people who are working in them, and not just for the children. And sometimes staff need to be enticed outdoors. The younger staff at nurseries are the first generation who've grown up with screens, and some of them are not actually very comfortable with outdoor learning and need a lot of support. So not everybody likes mud, and mud is wonderful, but you need variety, and you need to have spaces that can be looked after and maintained day to day. So there's a practical element, and there's a design element, and it's that whole notion of safe danger, and perhaps there's a notion of tidy untidiness, where staff still feel that they have an element of control over their working environment. In addition, post-COVID, getting people outside and working outside is going to be the healthiest and safest way for us to go forward. The green recovery hopefully will herald a new ethos in the way we look at education, which will support what the 1140 people have been doing. And there's the whole of the issue about climate change and sustainable design and getting people working, playing outside. So some of this stuff is really hot off the press because we've built stuff during the lockdowns. We haven't had stuff terribly well photographed, so it's a little bit rough and ready, but here are some examples of some of the stuff that ERTs have been doing. I wanted to start off with just looking at Arcadia, which isn't an 1140 expansion project, but which has been hugely influential in the way that we've looked at the 1140 years stuff. Arcadia was built in 2015 for Edinburgh University, and it had a really good budget and a really inspiring client who was really interested in free play and Scandinavian theories about children being able to flow from indoors to outdoors in a very seamless way. And this is something that has been very much adopted by the Care Commission and the 1140 expansion project. In terms of design, lots of varieties of space and lots of different places to sit for grown-ups and for children, and lots of different shelters, types of shelter, lots of movable parts. So creating a really, really good, strong architectural framework, which you can then fill up with all kinds of gubbings. So this notion of tidy untidiness, lots of good storage, and something that looks good even when it's messy, that you'd still enjoy. So the idea of outdoor rooms recurs time and time and again in my work, and these are very contained outdoor rooms, absorbing existing features. So there's a cultural sense of place here. Statues are kept, trees are kept and used and embedded in the design. And very functional and practical spaces that are designed for purpose and that work for all ages. So the growing beds double as seats. A grown-up can sit on there to work. You can get wheelchairs up to them in some places. They have good circulation. It's really, really sturdy, and it looks good. It's you know, it can take a real hammering. And the potting shed is bespoke and designed to work for someone who's 2 foot tall and someone who's 6 foot tall, can work side by side in the potting shed. Children's drawings embedded in the background into the fencing, for that sort of continuity, because they were moving from an old nursery into a new one, and we wanted people to feel at home. And it's elegant. Edinburgh University is a very elegant campus, and our spaces are elegant and playful. And I don't think we need to sacrifice beauty and elegance and delight to playfulness. They go hand in hand to me. So we've even got a little Greek temple for Arcadia at the bottom of the garden, which is made out of woven willow. And this is very early, but I imagine it's quite a bush by now. Seating is so important and so often forgotten for grown-ups. So our edges are nearly always seats. We build all kinds of different incidental seating into our early years designs. And these are tables and walkways and runways for the kids, but they're places where adults can comfortably sit 400 mil high. Could also sit on the logs. We were part of the reference design development for the 1140 hours, working with Nor Architects and East Ayrshire Council, and we did a great deal of consultation with staff and parents at the start of that process. And this wordle just shows you that trees and play came out very, very strongly in our consultation. Our remit was about indoor-outdoor flow and natural play. And the reference design that was developed with Nor, we called it a matchbox design. The idea was that you were pulling the inside outside, a bit like extracting the base of a matchbox, and then you were popping bits out of the matchbox to catch lots of natural light. So this was the matchbox design. And you can see in plan that it's almost, if you didn't have green and blue, you would struggle to decide which was the inside and which was the outside. The scale and the flow of space is constant throughout the reference design. And it's really designed. I mean, we really worked hard. It's very inspired by Parc Citron in Paris, and the idea of a central forum surrounded by small, distinct rooms with distinct characters that can be used for different things. But the whole notion of being very adaptable to individual needs and individual places, because a reference design by its very nature is not tied to place. So the idea is that these big pergola frames are designed with lots of holes and hooks so that you can add ropes, add hammocks, add pictures, add seats, and the garden flows beneath the pergola, and the pergola sets up a system of small spaces. We've never had a chance to build this. It was notional. To be really, really frank, the reference design didn't ever look at a metric for outdoor space or how to pay for it. So it's a very notional set of ideas. But we were really lucky because we were then appointed by East Ayrshire Council to do 10 retrofit nurseries. And we were working suddenly with all kinds of different buildings, but we had a decent budget to retrofit some of those ideas to existing nurseries in East Ayrshire. This is Patna, and Patna wasn't very old, but it had been completely surfaced in rubber safety surface at enormous expense. And the current thinking from East Ayrshire Council, quite rightly, was that this was a pretty old-fashioned way of looking at things and not conducive to natural play. And we had to really to start again. So it was a big blank canvas in many ways. And the scheme that we ended up with is much, much more sensual. And we've got grass, sand, trees, hills, and we were able to experiment or develop the ideas in the reference design. So one of the ideas in the reference design was about rills and puddle ponds. And we built our first puddle pond at Patna, which the mud kitchen has a sink, it drains down a little rill, and you can make a puddle with the big plug, or you can empty it and you've really just got a hard paved area that you can use for other things. But as you can see, the puddle is very popular. So we've been using puddle ponds and developing that idea a great deal in East Ayrshire. And the very first prototype play pergola with its hooks and holes, not yet in use. I haven't got any pictures of it in use, but I'm hoping by now this is festooned with fairy lights and hammocks and ropes. So Patna was very much the first project. And I'm very sorry that I don't have any better photographs of it. These are site photos. Newmilns was an absolute nightmare site. Is an existing nursery with very poor connection between the inside and the outside, and a very rickety set of old play equipment with a fence around it. Very poorly maintained, a little fragment of green space adjacent. And to get to school, all the primary school children have to walk right through the middle of this. So a big constraint there too. And the work that we've done at Newmilns has been about connecting the inside to the outside and also to the fragment of green space. So these are gates that primary school children can walk through, but when they're open, the kids can walk through. When the gates are shut to the primary school kids, there's free flow right across the school access path into the adjacent green space. And what we've done is opened up a double door in the nursery and created flow onto a big deck. We've got sand and gentle changes in level. And you can see another one of our rills with the puddle pond. The tap's right by the mud kitchen, and we've got wild plants growing, coming in, and those are just really robust, can cope with anything, native stuff, lots of buddleia and, you know, all the stuff that could get trampled on and still survive. Detail's really important. This takes such a hammering, so we're constantly testing and refining our details. Lots of drainage is a huge issue because there's water play, silt traps, all that kind of technical stuff, and repurposing things as well. The budgets weren't huge, so repurposing the old boat and painting it to match. And here's the mud kitchen in use after a few weeks, things growing in, and you get a real sense of the indoor outdoor. And I think that it really helps bring the building back to life. This tired old building starts to look quite friendly again. Here's someone enjoying the green space across the other side of the footpath. Hurlford was a completely different challenge in East Ayrshire, and the school was a big Victorian with just a ring of tarmac around it, very, very constrained and completely hard. And what we've done here is we've introduced a planter that is as big as the space in front of the school and filled it with earth and planted that up with trees. And there's willow going in there as well. You see the storage unit behind. And then the rest of the planter is a sand pit. So we've just filled the whole space basically. And again, lots of steps and places to sit and places to climb if you're a kid, places to sit if you're an adult. No storage. So the whole thing's got a bit of a beach theme at Hurlford, and we've got beach huts for storage and play. And you can see here that grown-ups enjoy it as much as children, because this is our team out on an office site visit to Helford playing in the sand. What I want to finish up by saying is that play spaces aren't just for kids. They, as I said, they're workplaces, but we shouldn't either lose our ability and enjoyment to play. It's a really important part of our work as landscape architects, and I think working with play and learning has really enhanced the way I'm looking at other spaces. I like playing, so this is me anyway in a sailing boat that we made for Brodie Castle, but I'm constantly on site saying to contractors, remember what it's like to be 3 years old. When you're building this, remember what it's like to hide under something. Remember what it's like to be able to squeeze into that gap. And I think that's the message that I want to leave you with. Remember what it's like to be 3 years old, because it shapes your whole life. And, you know, landscape is the earth beneath our feet and the stars above our head. And landscape is the starting place for everybody's story. So if we can make the starting place for everybody's story a wonderful landscape, then we are definitely going to be part of improving the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicity. A couple of things that I picked out of that is the importance of the quality of the landscape for children. Just because they're young children doesn't mean to say they should have an inferior landscape, and I think that was really clearly seen in what you've done. I also hope that some of those adults have a chance to climb as well as the children, because that can be the most wonderful thing when you see the children and the adults together climbing and really sharing that experience. Just a quick question, the importance, you were talking a lot about that free flow inside and outside. How do you go about thinking about the design of the transition space, that link between indoors and outdoors? How do you focus on that, and what kind of things do you kind of consider when you think about transition?
It's a real challenge, and ideally I think it works like in our reference design, where you have an interstitial space, so you have a big indoor and outdoor space that binds the two together. But when you're working with retrofit, and our 1140 years that have been delivered so far are all retrofit. We've got 3 new builds in Edinburgh, but they're not there yet. You have to just be really adaptable. We've fitted a lot of doors that have push pads so that kids can push them themselves and open the doors. And we've also done air gap doors and added porches on to other ones where, so that you keep it warm inside. But I think it's a really, really big challenge on retrofit. But ideally, you're looking for some sort of canopy that binds both the building and the architecture together.
And gives children a chance to kind of pause before they go on out into the landscape beyond as well. I think that's really important too.
I think that's really important. And we also do quite a lot of work for children with special needs and for children with autism. And I think that this probably applies to many other children as well. When you come out into a new space, it is really important to have somewhere to pause and somewhere that's quite easy to read and quite easy to understand. So something simple and calm, like a big deck or a nice lawn, is actually not a luxury, but an essential part of that journey out to be wilder and braver. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Felicity. That was really interesting, really wonderful start to our webinar. So next person that we're going to turn to is Nicola Murray, who is Technical Director of Landscape Architect at Wardle Armstrong. And she's going to really talk about the process of designing for early years settings and looking at that through a number of examples of what she's doing. So Natalie, if I can ask you to turn your microphone on and share your screen, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello. Can you see that okay? Yep, great, thank you. Sorry, 1 second, let me just get my notes up here. Sorry, we're all getting used to this. Right. Okay. So yeah, it's Natalie Murray. It's Natalie Murray. I'm Natalie Murray.
Many apologies. I've written it down about 10 times, so I got it right, and of course I got it wrong, so many apologies.
No, don't worry at all. I'm technical director at Wardle Armstrong, and we do a huge amount of education work as landscape architects from early years right the way through to higher education as well. And we've been fortunate enough to do quite a number of the early years facilities in response to Scotland's response to the 1140 hours programme. As Mary said at the beginning, I'm a Learning Through Landscapes accredited designer. Some of you might know it as Grounds for Learning, which is what it was in Scotland before the big takeover. But fundamentally, that is talking about the relationship, the intrinsic relationship between people, place, and the curriculum. And the curriculum being a really important part in how we're approaching these spaces, that they are a learning resource in the same way that the internals of schools and early years facilities are seen as learning spaces. What we're trying to do is make all of our early years spaces not just a sunny day space for when the weather's good, but somewhere that all year round learning can be taking place in these spaces that we're creating. We've also worked closely with Architecture Design Scotland and helped them produce the guidance on the indoor-outdoor concept and the concept of free flow that Felicity was just talking about there. Which I think has been a particular challenge on some of the refurbishment spaces that we've been working within, a bit easier to achieve on some of the new builds. The presentation today is in 3 parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory of play and outdoor learning, and then go into a bit more detail on what we're calling the design toolkit and some of the design principles that we've developed, and then a few case studies at the end that start to illustrate how we've been applying some of those principles. So the need for outdoor play, I feel like I'm hopefully preaching to the converted here, in that children are spending less time outdoors than ever before, and it's causing real issues. And so some of the feedback from the generation from a health and safety perspective in terms of health and well-being for the generation of children coming through at the moment, and I think this is not just in Scotland but across lots of countries, is things like such busy lifestyles, and it's causing issues such as vitamin deficiencies, low physical activity levels, lifelong health issues, poor health and well-being, lots of restricted early development, and issues with respiratory health. And I'm sure Mary will agree that's just a handful of some of the issues that are being proven by sort of medical research at the moment. So why do we need to play? The early years are transformational, and if we get the early years right, it's been proven that people are going on to have a much better relationship with their natural environment into later life as well. And it's been proven to improve social skills, self-esteem, emotional intelligence, concentration capacity. And the early years, and especially the 1140 hours programme, is really the perfect platform for us to develop that understanding of the environment and to go on and ensure that as young adults and as adults, we've got the roles and responsibilities in line with the environment itself. So what is play all about? Children naturally interact with their environment through play. It's instinctive, like Mary said at the beginning about the young, the animals that instinctively play. Children are the same, and if you have this receptor and a stimulus coming together, you have a response. And the way that we like to think about our landscape designs is that the child is the receptor, the landscape is the stimulus, and that naturally creates this sense of play. So you'd think, therefore, it would be easy to get everybody outdoors, and we often find that the children are raring to go, welly boots on, whatever the weather, but a lot of the space that we're designing is about it being captivating for the pupils and the young children, as well as for the staff and the parent council and everybody else that's involved, and that goes right the way through to the maintenance teams as well, so that everybody's really on board with that journey. So in terms of taking those 3 points in turn, the child as the receptor, children are always learning wherever they are, not just within their early years setting. So I think some of the way that we approach these spaces is that there's an adult-led perception that they enter the early years setting or the primary school gates and then they're learning. But actually, we get our head around this understanding that they're learning everywhere that they are. They're inquisitive and open and like little sponges soaking up the world around them. So the more variety that we can build into these spaces, the better. One of the first things we do on lots of our early years projects is to look beyond the early years setting itself and look at what other sites are there from a strategic point of view, what are the other local sites that we can tap into, other resources nearby that we know that these children have got exposure to. And all of that helps to inform our thinking before we've even put pen to paper. So the landscape as the stimulus, I think the list could be endless in terms of the benefits of being outside. And the biggest one is we've got nature on our side compared to being on the inside of the building. So it promotes creativity, offers sensory experience, freedom, supports imagination, supports development. It's enriching, stimulates, offers self-esteem and responsibility to care for the environment. And I think there's a lot of theory that's been written about it. And I'd hope that as landscape architects here today, we're all in agreement that the landscape is the best opportunity and the best space that we've got there that we can help enhance and improve to really achieve some of these wonderful play spaces that we're creating. So play then as the response. So when those two things come together, we get play as the response, inspired by nature. So the way that we have been approaching our 1140 hours response is to replicate or to try and mimic some of what we see in nature. So the intricate and complexities of nature, and the spaces being very multi-purpose. So you can see here the top diagram is a typical approach to natural play zones where everything could be quite defined. And what we've tried to do in some of our spaces is to blur the boundaries a little bit between these spaces, taking a lead from nature. And you'll see that in the case studies that we go through at the end here. So how do we play? We've decided not to design too much by activity, but what we think a child could gain from in each of these spaces. So we've tried to look at it holistically in terms of what's the child doing in that space, but what are they actually learning from that activity, and what are they doing there in a much more wider sense, rather than an adult-led perception where we might say, oh, they're balancing along a beam or they're learning to ride a trike. But with those skills, there's lots of other learning going on as well. We've developed what we've called these 5 forms of play, and we've used these really to help us think about the variety and diversity that we want to achieve in all of the spaces, and whether that's an early years setting that's existing that we're just doing a light touch upgrade, or whether that's a new build setting with a much larger budget. We're approaching them with this same sort of 5 forms of play. So just to quickly run through the 5 forms, we've got freedom and risk. So finding out about your limits and abilities and how your actions affect you and the world around you. And you can see there, just from the sort of mood board of images, some of the sorts of spaces that we would look to create within the areas for freedom and risk. Comfort and relaxation. So learning how to look after yourself and choosing how and with who you want to play. We've got skills and achievements, so finding out what you're good at, how you can improve and what you can enjoy doing. And that would naturally lend itself to some of the larger spaces with hard surfacing for the bikes and trikes, as well as sand, water, motor skills and speed and strength. Discovery and inspiration is the 4th one. So finding out how the world works and where we fit within it. So these spaces often would have lots of sensory opportunities, so wildlife and nature, colours, smells and sounds, lots of variety. They're imaginative, very creative spaces, and these are often your smaller pocket spaces as well. And I think it's important that we've got that variety of scale and the little areas of shelter and the pocket spaces, because I think, as Felicity said in her presentation, not all children love being outdoors, getting wet, getting muddy. So it's important that we create a whole variety of spaces for everybody. And then social acceptance. So learning about our role as part of community and the importance of different people working together. So just going into the design toolkit. So what we want to do is just run through some of the design principles. So starting to think about when we're approaching these spaces, the key things and the design principles that are underlying how we're approaching them stems from what we've developed as the 4 C's of a quality playground. So we've used this list as a bit of a benchmark checklist of our quality play spaces. So we encourage clients to use this list as well when they're assessing spaces, and we keep reverting back to this throughout the design process, starting to understand about whether the space is captivating. Is it interesting and exciting to consistently draw you outdoors? The space needs to have tailored outdoor facilities so that you don't have to go back inside. The space needs to be a learning resource for the children and a teaching resource for the staff as well. And the space needs to be accessible and manageable. So these 4 C's, captivating, comfortable, curricular, and convenient, are the 4 that we keep coming back to. And the quote there at the top right of the slide that you can see is, it's not about the sort of expensiveness nature or the quality of the play equipment itself, but it's about this inspiration and the richness of interaction that's facilitated between the child and their environment. So just taking some of these design principles in turn. So we've got 3, we've got movement and flow, risk and challenge, and then stops and refuge. And as we go through each of these, you'll see that we're sort of tying them back to the 4 C's. So is it captivating? So under the category of movement and flow, do we consider scale, views and speed? Under comfortable, does it ensure usability and accessibility of all spaces? Is it easy and clear with access to facilities? Has it got shelters and toilets? All these things that we're thinking about at each stage. So risk and challenge, you can see here, and again, under the 4 C's that we've tied it back to. Captivating, so we're thinking about, does it consider height, slope, weather exposure, and does it create unique landscape features? Is it comfortable? Can the child take on a challenge gradually, and they can always retreat if needed and go back to it at a future time? Tying it back to the curriculum, so it allows for a range of challenges within different learning outcomes. And is it convenient? So considers accessibility for children and staff, and importantly, thinking about the adults that are going to be using these spaces as well. And then in terms of stops and refuge, so starting to think about shelter and microclimate within the space. Is it comfortable and usable with spaces for resting, eating, and finding quiet, safe spots? Under curriculum, is it support range of physical, mental, and social development? And you can see by all the time thinking back to the 4 C's and using these design principles, we start to build up this clear variety and diversity within the spaces that we've provided. So just to quickly go through some of the case studies of projects that we've been looking at, we have been working very closely with Aberdeenshire Council and thinking about how do we apply these principles, and whether that's existing facilities. We're doing a range of projects where we're existing refurbishment buildings and their externals, and some of the ones are new build as well. And the guidance called Space to Grow, if you're familiar with that, which was written by for the government as part of the blueprint for this, is a good piece of reference material to keep going back to, which gives a good reference point for lots of the things that they would like some of these early years facilities to include. So we've taken a couple of these examples just to give you a flavour of what we've been doing. So Fisher Moss Nursery, making the most of the existing site. So starting to look at the site as it stands. So we've obviously got existing trees there that we want to retain and make the most of. They offer scale, character and habitat. There's a natural slope in the topography that we really want to capitalise upon, and an opportunity to reflect on local history and character as well. So this is the ground as it was. You can see from the aerial on the bottom left, it was a combination of hard standing and a large expanse of lawn. And then this slide is starting to look at how we've applied the design principles to this space. So the progression from open to wilder spaces. And you can see from the arrow here how we've gone through the range of spaces. So we're starting to look at hard standing first of all, closest to the building, and then more of a meadow space, which is softer, more open and sheltered. and then the sand garden as an active space, and then the forest and the pond are more of the peripheral spaces. And the diagram in the middle, they're starting to look at how we've applied the movement and flow, refuge and stops, and the risk and challenge to those spaces as well. And you can see here a variety of photos from the site. This one was finished last year, and you can start to see how these spaces are coming together. So a real natural palette of materials, lots of soft works going in. The large sort of timber poles there with the eyelets to offer flexibility for hammocks, or I know the early years facility have been hanging up large sheets of tarpaulin and using them for arts and crafts and messy play space days outside. And all of these sorts of uses where the outdoors has really come into its own as a learning resource. And I think one of the things to pick up on there is some of the detailing. So designing at a micro level as well, and starting to look at sort of small timber edge treatments in place of curbs in places, just so that every single bit of the nursery and the grounds is working very hard to offer that variety. And then the next one is West Hill Nursery. So again, up in Aberdeenshire, you can see here the sort of existing grounds that we were working with. So a huge amount of rubber crumb safety surfacing, quite an uninspiring space, huge amount of hard standing around that. An opportunity to use the building to create a range of smaller and more intimate spaces, and utilising existing play equipment. So some of these spaces, we didn't have a huge budget at all. So working hard with what they already had, if they had a huge amount of loose parts or some of the play equipment that we could repurpose into the new setting. And so here you can start to see again how we've applied those principles that we went through earlier. So the varied landscape being accessible from the building, and then going through the range of hard standing, open, accessible and functional space into, on this one, what we've created is a sand garden. And then beyond that into more of a meadow space, and then lastly a rain garden space. And I think water play is a key component in lots of these early years schemes that we're working within, and how we've done that collaboratively with the engineers. We've made it an integral part of the SUDS and water management system for the schemes. And what you'll start to see in the images just coming through here are how the water play spaces are really coming into their own. So as soon as it's raining, some of these spaces like here are filling up with water, and you've got these sort of natural rills and puddle spaces with the timber sort of beams where the children can get really close up to the water. They're interacting with it. And again, attention to detail on some of these sort of small edge details here between the sand and the timber that's creating this sort of boardwalk space between the materials. The kids love to play with this as a sort of level crossing space, imagining that they're a train going around the track. And some of these little real sort of small attention to detail things are quite critical on getting these projects right. You can see here some of the sand garden and change of level, some of the planting that started to go in as well, lots of natural materials, a real natural play space that's being created. And then here, I think just to reference the point that every single early years facility is unique, and every single nursery has its own identity. And we're really keen that it's not a one size fits all approach to these spaces. So I think on this one in particular, there's a lighthouse nearby, and the local community have that as a real reference point. So the children wanted to create this their own lighthouse that you can see here with the islets along it. And so little pointers like that along the way help to reinforce that cultural element and sense of identity to each individual nursery that we're working within. And these images here are the rain garden space that I was just speaking about. So you can see in this one down here how the sort of SUDS and rain gardens has been designed collaboratively, and these spaces fill up with water, and the kids are running across here and really engaging with that in terms of a all year round sensory experience. So that is a whistle stop tour through a couple of the nurseries that we've been working within. And I think important to start thinking how we can apply the principles that we've been working with in the theory. So the headlines, the takeaway points are happy, healthy children and a rich natural landscape provide a high quality play environment. And that if we can establish that strong relationship with the outdoors at these early years, it can create a positive influence throughout entire lives. I think importantly, designing on a spatial framework level as well as at a detailed level, and giving real attention to detail on some of the small micro components of these spaces. And then the 4 C's. So is it captivating, comfortable? Does it tie back to the curriculum? And is it a convenient space? And lastly, just remembering that every facility is unique. So to be approaching every single one with a new brief, a new series of ideas, but using these tools as reference points and design principles that we can keep coming back to ensure that we're achieving as much as we can for the young people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Natalie.
Okay.
I'm delighted to see with both presentations how much rubber crumb we're getting rid of, and these wonderful new kind of natural spaces that connect children so much more with nature. Natalie, I'd just like to ask you one quick question about how you engage with stakeholders, how you're working with the estates teams and also with the staff at these settings. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, sure. We think right from the beginning, it's very important that we take everybody on that journey with us to buy into this. And that's everybody from parent council to the staff working in the nursery. And I think the estates team and the maintenance teams are really key within that as well, because too often I think we've done all the work that we don't often have a job convincing or educating in terms of the early years practitioners. They know better than us about what the young people need and want, but sometimes the hurdles are things like building control or estates teams or different departments within a local authority that have maybe had bad experiences. And risk seems to be a big one. We spend quite a lot of time talking about risk and how to overcome risks. I think the stakeholder engagement is absolutely key, so that before anything's even being implemented, everybody is completely bought into to the concept of what we're doing and the benefits that we're providing as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think sometimes it's getting those parents out to just what Felicity was saying as well, you know, reminding all those involved what it was like to be a 3-year-old and you know, the importance of those things. And if people are worried about risk, at LTL, we encourage people to do a risk benefit approach, so that you're looking at the benefits as well as the risks, so that you can balance out that actually a slightly riskier activity has greater benefits, and so you balance that out when you're doing your risk assessment, so you do that additional bit. And if you want kind of research to back that up, the International School Grounds Alliance have produced a document all about the importance and benefits of risk. And one of the key things they say is that school grounds, and that includes early years settings, should be as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. And it's in many different languages if you want to see it. So do visit their website, and it's got lots of research on the back of it as well, linked to the importance of risk for children as they're growing up. So thank you, Natalie. So that leads us nicely on, talking of stakeholders and people who we have to, as designers, make happy. I'm going to hand over to Catherine and Elsie, who are early years development officers at West Lothian Council. So they will be looking at this from a different perspective, and that's going to be fascinating. So I'm going to hand over to you two to take us on the next bit of our journey.
Okay, I'm just checking if everybody can see the PowerPoint, and can you hear? Yep, great, thank you.
Okay, and I hope I'm able to be seen and heard as well. So thank you so much for inviting us along to this webinar today. Catherine and I are thrilled to be invited, and just to give you a little bit of context, that we are both we've spent many years at the chalk face before we've come in to the centre to be development officers. And so we're coming from a great deal of experience as well. So when the Scottish Government announced the huge expansion in early years, we knew that there was going to be an exciting but a very busy time ahead for us in West Lothian. We're just a small authority with a small team, and we knew it was going to be a massive undertaking, but we were really excited by the challenge that everyone was buying into. We very quickly went on to survey mode to find out what we needed in regard to extra capacity, because that was one of the main challenges for us to meet that 1140 promise that the Scottish Government had made, and the projects were fairly quickly identified in principle. So the projects that we came up with were, as you see on the slide, 2 brand new nursery buildings, 3 new nurseries in existing schools, which were also a very big challenge for us, extending and refurbishing nurseries for us, and many other improvements to settings to increase capacity, often looking at improving free flow to outside space, and also to create toilets, because that was another big push that we were asked to have a look at so that the children could remain outside. And all the time through all of this, we were remembering that we were advocates for the children and their families who would benefit from this expansion. So we knew that the Scottish Government investment was on a huge scale, one that we would never have been able to do as a local authority, and would provide excellent new provision for the children and families in West Lothian, as well as giving us a chance to renew and extend some of the settings that needed a bit of TLC. It was our job as an early years team to make sure that this happened and that the money was well spent. But as you can imagine, budget is never enough, and we certainly didn't have the kind of budget that was used on Arcadia, so we knew we would have to spend every penny wisely. We were very fortunate with the design teams who were appointed to our big projects, who also wanted to create something up to the minute to ensure that the children's well-being and their learning was our top priority. We all went away and did our own research using some of the documents mentioned already, Space to Grow, My World Outdoors, Out to Play, as well as looking at what was happening nationally and internationally, best practice situations that were out there. Most importantly, everyone in the team acknowledged that outdoor spaces and indoor environment had to have a link. There had to be a collaboration between the two, strong links, and they had to complement each other. So the landscape architect was brought on board at a very early stage, and this really excited us in the early years team. We had kind of been used to going in retrospectively to try and improve environments, and that's not always easy. Many of our staff had been taking part in national professional learning opportunities, and our early years team at the centre were also spending a lot of time doing training with staff to how to improve outdoor spaces and how to improve learning through those spaces. But however, this was a great opportunity for us now to look at environments right from a starting point. So we wouldn't have to just depend on the spaces that were available, but create new spaces and also look at natural and woodland spaces that were round about us. It was also really important in West Lothian for us to get involved in pilots that were happening, and certainly many of our schools took up those opportunities as well. So communication was really important between everyone, and Mary asked a question about the estates teams, and that certainly was one of the first things that we had to look at. But linking all the parties together was really an important part of the job that I was doing at many levels, but on a very practical level, ensuring that everybody's views and ideas were aired and debated, and then decisions communicated to everyone involved. It was a challenge, and it was well worth the effort, and the outcomes have proven that. That included both our design teams, our building and our landscape teams. That included senior managers in our authority, the early years team at the centre, head teachers and practitioners, as well as the care inspectorate. At every stage, we shared our plans with the care inspectorate, because obviously we were looking for new registrations for our premises, and we wanted to make sure that we were getting it right. Being brave enough to kind of break away from the norm was also really important, and it took encouragement and everybody encouraging each other and determination to make sure that our senior managers were on board with that as well, and our estates teams. West Lothian was seen as a very risk-averse authority, and it was our job to make sure that they could understand the reasons why we needed them to be less so. So For example, things like outdoor taps had been banned in our authority, and we had to really go the extra mile to encourage them to understand from our point of view why it was really important that they moved away from being so risk adverse in regard to the maintenance issues. So we also had to make sure that everyone in the school and in education side understood that creating a natural environment would not happen overnight, that this was something that would take many years to mature and to develop, but also that we would have to go on after the garden was prepared and presented to continue to nurture and develop that as a learning space for all the reasons that Catherine will go on and explain. We also have to go through to continue to support our staff and our children and our families in the use of these spaces and how they can continue to develop and invest in them and involve not only service users, but the community as well. And a lovely piece of information I got just recently was that parents in one of our projects are going to expand further out from our nursery and create some allotments that will also include the children being involved in those as well. So us providing that benefit and putting that investment into the community is having a knock-on effect as well. We'll also have to make sure that we learn from what's being created. It's also important, just as outside space will grow, so will ideas and designs and methods, and we have to make sure that we continue to move forward with those. On that note, I'll pass over to Catherine, who will explain a wee bit more in depth about how the outdoors is crucial for our children.
Okay, thank you very much, Elsie. As Elsie said, my name's Catherine Thomas, and I'm going to speak to you on, I suppose, on behalf of being an actual early years practitioner, and to say what is it that we want. And it's just to say, as you all know, that not all outdoor areas are the same. And to be honest with you, as a practitioner, for me, it's about that potential, and it's about the potential of the space to engage imagination, the curiosity, and that creativity. And it's all about that. It's all about the potential of the space. And I put that photograph in there from the 1970s because that is actually quite similar to the play spaces that I had in the 70s. It was all concrete, and it was all tubes and tunnels, and they were all concrete and big boulders, but there was the potential there, you know, for those boulders to be motorbikes and aeroplanes and all that, but there was no nature, but we did have that potential, so that was a plus. Now, in West Lothian, we base our pedagogy on Frederick Sobel. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Frederick. Here he is here. He's very handsome, as you can see. So he was around in the 1800s. He was born on the 21st of April, I think. And he was the inventor of the kindergarten. And he very much saw the potential and the need for our children to experience nature and the outdoors. And there's a little photograph of his kindergarten there, and every child had their own little garden. So we very much base our pedagogy in West Lothian on Froebelian principles. And it's all about that child-centered, and it's all about play pedagogy, and it's all about treating our children with respect and saying that they're independent, they're capable, they're confident, so they can cope with risk, they can cope with real tools, and you know, and it's to give them that experience of nature. And all our documents here, and you can see them all there, they all also promote all these principles. And that's what we're trying to do for our outdoor spaces. And I can see from the presentations that have been that you're trying to do that too for us, which is brilliant. So basically, as a Froebelian practitioner, what do I want from the outdoor play space? And here's my list here. I want that rich sensory first-hand experience. I want them to be able to plant, to dig, to look for worms. I want them to see the caterpillars and have that wonder when they see a rainbow and a ladybird, all of that. I want the opportunity for that. And also want them to have space and freedom to explore and investigate and experiment. I mean, it's really important that they have space. They can run, they can slide, they can jump, they can climb, they can practice all of that, you know, and they can experience running and sliding and all these things. So they get the concepts of gravity and gradient and energy. I also want them to take risks, and I want them to have that adventure. And obviously I had to connect it all into my curriculum. So it's got to give opportunities for them to experience all areas of the curriculum, and that happens with ease. So in a garden, that's what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for them to have that direct experience of nature. So if you've got a tree in the garden, if they can see all the seasons through that tree, fantastic. I want them to have the opportunity to plant and to dig. Uneven grounds is a must, you know, because these children who are 2 and 3 and 4, they're just learning walking, and they've only been walking for, obviously some of them, they might only have been walking for a year. So they need to be able to go on uneven ground, to come up and down steps and curbs, all the practice for them. I need wild areas, and I need, as I say, lots of experiences that they can move and run and slide and balance. I need open-ended materials, and I need spaces that they can hide, exactly what you're all doing for us, which is great. And the gardening thing is so important. We grew so many things, and we had bumper crops. One situation, you know, that springs to mind is perhaps about 10 years ago, and we had a bumper crop of parsnips. We had more parsnips than we could ever sort of give away or eat. But, you know, it was interesting because everyone in the setting, apart from the staff, called the parsnips white carrots, and they kept saying, those are lovely white carrots, and we kept saying, they're parsnips. So it's about engaging the whole community, the family, and we had families making parsnip soup for the first time ever. But I have to say that they did come back in and say, that white carrot soup was lovely, Mrs. Thomas. But we're trying. And we need lots of opportunities for that: curiosity, inquiry, and creativity. Our whole curriculum is actually based on those words: curiosity, inquiry, and creativity. In ELC, we want our children to be looking, to be asking questions and problem solving, because that's the skills that they need for life. Obviously, we want that imagination and that creative thinking there. These are examples of a storytelling area, and it was a student that made that in one of our settings there. That was part of our project there. We want that problem solving, we want them to make connections, being open-ended, as we say, and use all those resources that are available to them. That caring for the living things, that's so important as well, caring for the birds and the plants, and they get so much out of that. And obviously, you know, for the curriculum, and we have their numeracy in our curriculum, we have our literacy all embedded through our outdoor areas. So, and here's the questions that I always think about. Has my outdoor area got that place of wonder and inquiry? Are the children going to have that direct engagement with the natural world? Is it adventurous for them? Is it going to be challenging them? Is it a place where their imagination and their creativity is going to flourish? Are they able to adapt and transform it as part of their play? So we don't want a lot of things that are fixed, and we want them to drag things and move them. And we need to give them the freedom. Okay, and my final thoughts are that it's really important about our gardens, because the way that we create the gardens actually says what we think of our children. So that's why, and we want our gardens to be these inspiring places, you know, that I saw in the 2 PowerPoints. And you know, that way, and we want our gardens to have those rich, challenging spaces so our children can discover the joy, excitement, and the mystery of the world that we live in. Unfortunately, not all our gardens are like those that we saw in PowerPoints, but that's our goal in West Lothian, to try and get gardens like the ones that we saw earlier. So thank you very much for listening. I'll just stop sharing.
That's super. Thank you, Catherine and Elsie. And a couple of things I wrote down. One of the things that I noticed there, that kind of development for life, of how children, you know, you're starting with problem solving at a very early age, and that is what you build on, and we grow and we develop as we go through our education and life in general. And I suppose one of the things I wanted to ask you two about was this getting the other services on board, and how you've managed to do that, and whether you feel you've succeeded. it has been mentioned a couple of times that, you know, it's so important that these spaces are looked after, and how you've managed to do that. Do the practitioners get involved? Do you have, how are they managing to maintain those sites, and how are those settings supported as they go on, you know, as they are introduced to their new grounds and through beyond that? I don't mind which one of you answers those, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And do you want to answer, Elsie, because you've got the kind of side from the maintenance side, and the maintenance side bit was a struggle because they are very still quite risk averse, and it's all about sort of fire for them, and they don't want anything too close to buildings and loose parts. They don't like loose parts at all. So we've had many battles, haven't we, Elsie, about loose parts?
Yeah, I think it's right. I think what I said is that we need to involve whole schools, whole communities. The fact that our nurseries in West Lothian are going to be open 50 weeks a year now has made life much easier. So when we're growing things, there's somebody there to look after them, where before we would have to twist the janitor's arm to pop in and to you know, make sure our things weren't dying, were getting watered and so on. So that's a big bonus for us. And one of my jobs is to work with schools to make sure if there are any issues arising, that we get them sorted quickly, that schools really think ahead, that what we put in is easily maintained, because we don't have huge budgets. None of us have huge budgets going on for maintenance. So what we put in has to be robust and last for a long time. So it's all those sorts of things. And, you know, a couple of the projects recently, we've planted hedges, and we've got just a makeshift fence round that will eventually come away. So we haven't had to produce a fence that will have to be maintained for many years, because these can all be expensive. So looking at natural boundaries has been something that we've thought about recently. But as you say, we've really got to work with the whole community, and that includes parents and carers. And that's one of the things that we've been emphasising with staff, that everybody has a part. And if you make it an exciting place that the children get excited, then you can bring those parents on board. But, you know, you were right. Somebody said earlier that we want children to have this love, this passion for our natural environment. But many of their parents don't have that passion. And so it's about inspiring those parents to have that passion. And we have to work really hard. It's almost harder to do that job, but more important to do that job than it is to do it with the children. The children come on board very easily. They are quite happy to get out there, and they love everything about outdoors. You never have to convince very many. There's very few children that don't love all of that. But some of their parents need really convincing. Some of them don't want the children getting dirty, etc., etc. And it's about working with the staff to help those parents have that passion and that love. And so I think that's a big job that all of our early years practitioners have. So we have challenges on two fronts, one with the parents and the children and the staff, making sure that's all looked after. And then the job that I do, which is working with our maintenance teams and getting them on board. And I have to say, we are beginning to win that battle again in West Lothian.
It can be quite a battle. I have seen the effect many times over the years. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions. We've got a little bit of time left. We're going to wrap up at 1:30. But if anybody else has any questions, please do add those into the Q&A. Okay, I've got one there from Vicky, but in the meantime, I've got a couple here. One is about that all of you may be able to answer this. Do you see any increase in funding from the Scottish Government to be able to make these changes to outside spaces and to support the 1140 hours? Anybody like to answer that?
Am I on mute? No.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm not aware of there being any additional funding coming out of Scottish Government at the moment. They've obviously made a big investment into 1140, and I think that's primarily because of the clever moves that the Care Commission did in their Space to Grow document, which enabled nurseries to up their role by 20% if they had a good enough outdoor space. And that was really, really clever. And I think that my experience of doing the reference design process with Scottish Futures Trust demonstrated that despite that, there's still a real reluctance to put proper money against outdoor space. And it's really heartening to hear Catherine and Elsie saying you know, that the indoors and the outdoors are equally important. And they really, really are for all schools, actually, not just for children in primary schools spend 35% of their time at playtime outdoors. But until we put a proper metric against outdoor space like we do against indoor space in the way that we procure education buildings, we're not going to get there. So it's not properly funded. It's still seen as an addition.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add to that, or is that sound? I'm not seeing anybody going, oh yes please, so I will carry on and ask the next question. And it was slightly touched on by Elsie and Catherine, but something that Natalie brought up in a sense was the importance of engaging with parents, especially those who may not have had these natural experiences themselves, and how do you encourage them to see the value of the nature play for their children? I don't know, Catherine, you may be a good person to respond to that one.
Well, you know, that way, to be honest with you, I've been fighting that battle with parents for 20 years, and it is constantly, you know, and it's often to do with they are worried about their child if they've got like asthma or a bad cold, and they think that it's going to be worse if they go outside. So they often come into the nursery and say they can't go out today because they've got a bad cough. And then, of course, we have a problem then because we have that open door policy, and we don't want to say to a child, and you can't go out. So we often have, you know, these really quite difficult conversations, you know, with parents to say to them, it's not about, obviously, if they go outside, they're not going to get the cold. Even worse, it's about the appropriate clothing. And that can be really tricky. And we've had quite a few, you know, sort of complaints that have escalated all the way up to MSPs saying it's Lothian schools are putting the children out in the bad weather and all of this, and it's a constant thing.
And am I right in saying that the Scottish Government have kind of responded to that issue in that there is quite a bit of funding going in for outdoor?
And they have indeed, and they're always very supportive, you know, they always sort of back us up and say, you know, that's our policy, and, you know, and, you know, and they always explain it also. And I think it's just going to be something that we're just always going to have to deal with until that culture shift comes. And, you know, but every single parent, eventually, they sort of give in, if you like, but sometimes it can take a while. And it can take a while. And it's about, you know, building that trust with the parent in each setting and saying to them, look, you know that we look after your child. We would never put them at risk by putting them out in the cold weather or the wind. It's always about keeping them safe. And eventually you do get there. But I personally have had some really heated sort of conversations with parents, and I've had some really kind of heated emails and letters from parents saying I was putting them at risk because I had them out in the snow, and I took them on a walk up a hill in the wind.
I think I have visited schools in both Finland and Canada, where it's either -18 or -15 degrees, where they decide, okay, the children maybe need to be inside. So it's rare that we get down. I know it's been cold recently, but it's rare that it gets down to that point. Elsie, are you wishing to come in?
Yeah, one of the things I did when I was in school, having just been out to Berlin to look at their Grundmachschule work, which was fabulous, was we brought parents in. We did lots of workshops. We brought them in on winter evenings, so starting at 4 o'clock, 4:30, when it was starting to get dark, and we did den building with the parents and their children. We did fire building down in the woods with the parents, and we just tried to change the mindset. And so that people were excited, you know, they were excited. So they went out and told the rest of the parents, and we would make sure that we teamed those parents up with the ones that were a wee bit reticent. And that's how we broke down those barriers. But it isn't something that's easy, and it's not ever going to go away. It's a continual problem that we're going to have, and it's just one that you just have to keep persevering with.
And I think there is a missed generation of people who haven't had those experiences so much. And that goes for practitioners as well, and we see that as we move through schools in as children get older. We've got a great question down here from Petra. I am a fan of natural play, but miss the link to combine it with tech and science. I'm just going to say a stick is a bit of technology, just saying. Using natural materials alone, is that the answer to play spaces for 2020, 30 and 40? Anybody else like to respond to that? Yes, Felicity.
build on what you said. I mean, a natural play environment is the epitome of science and technology learning. You can build things, you can learn about physics, you can learn about maths, you can do painting with natural materials, you can learn about art, you learn about how your body moves in space, you learn about risk assessment, and you can, I mean, I liked your one-liner. My one-liner that I use is, if you were learning to count, do you think you would remember it better by learning to pick up conkers and find them and count your conkers, or by counting red plastic discs sitting at a melamine desk?
Brilliant. Lovely. Anybody else want to add to that as we... I'm just kind of going around to everybody on the panel. I'm going to, Vicky's put a question on that I'm going to kind of finish with, but has anybody got anything else that you would like to add or ask each other that you have spotted during presentations? I think it was a really nice balance between the designers and those who commission the designers, I guess, and the clients, and how important that relationship can be to get it right. And it makes all the difference. Okay, well, I'm going to kind of finish. It's a bit cheeky how I'm finishing this, I have to admit. But the question Vicky has asked is how do you say we should be taking these design lessons out into the wider world? And can these principles be used to design spaces that are not nursery playgrounds? I'll let you kind of answer that. Anybody want to answer that first? And then I will give an answer from my perspective as well. But if anybody else would like to that, maybe Felicity or Natalie, how do we take these principles beyond nursery playgrounds?
I'd just say really quickly that designing the nursery playgrounds, and I've been doing it for about 10 years now, has fed directly into designing spaces for everybody else all the time. My design for people generally has improved greatly by designing for small people. Fantastic.
Natalie?
Yeah, I'd echo that. And I think what we're seeing is that the expectations that are raising in early years are feeding through into primary schools and secondary schools, because as those children who had a really great and innovative early years experience, they actually now expect more as they go up through the education system. And we're doing consultation at the moment with high school clients and pupils. And it's quite interesting that they're asking for a lot more out of their externals, because these are the first generation that have benefited from the early years outdoor learning push. And I think that's really encouraging that they're almost self-generating itself as we're climbing through with this generation.
And I have to say, we down in England are very jealous of your curriculum for excellence, which is a lot more emphasis on the outdoors as maybe we do south of the border, so we're very jealous about that.
I've got 3 children that have gone through school up here, and their experience from primary right the way through to university has been fantastic with the curriculum for excellence. But when my first one went to secondary school after primary, the one thing that she found really, really difficult was the loss of the playground. And she'd had a great primary school playground and not having anywhere to socialise. And I think for girls as well, social spaces and outdoor social spaces are really important. Secondary schools are next on the hit list. They must be.
Secondary schools are a big challenge. We do work with secondary schools, and they are a big challenge, partly because the way schools work, in that everybody is very much in their silo, in their curriculum area. And I'm a secondary teacher by training, and I was a PE teacher, and we sometimes work with some of the others, but and everybody knows their bit. And also the fact that secondary school grounds are so much bigger, that just the oh my goodness, where do we start syndrome can be a little overwhelming in secondary schools. But brilliant. Just a couple of people that, if you are interested in designing for early years in particular, Elsie, I think it was, mentioned Grundmarsch School in Berlin. They're an amazing group of landscape architects who've been designing and developing nature play specifically school grounds and early years settings in Berlin for over 30 years now. Basically, it was a response to bad behaviour that they saw in schools, and they realised that that had a link with asphalt playgrounds. and they have created some fantastic stuff. If you're interested in research into landscape architecture and designing play spaces, particularly for young children, then Professor Robin Moore is probably, you can find probably nobody better. He's part of the Natural Learning Initiative, although he is about to retire. They will continue at the North Carolina State University. So certainly worth looking at those if that's something you're interested in. And finally, I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to first of all say thank you to all our speakers, to Felicity, to Natalie, to Catherine and Elsie. I think it's been a really interesting session. I hope you, those who've been tuning in, have really enjoyed it and found it really useful to see what can be achieved in early years settings. And my final thing is to say that we will be hosting the International School Grounds Alliance Conference in September in Scotland, in Stirling. So I think it's well worth highlighting here, as we are doing a Scottish webinar. It was meant to be last September. Can't imagine why it got delayed. It will be a mixture, we hope, of in person, but there will also be online parts of this conference as well. We're working out how we can do that. But the link is there. But if you just go to the LTL website and look for conferences, you will find it. And it's being run also in conjunction with Learning Through Landscapes, the International School Grounds Alliance, and Living Classrooms, which is coordinated and run by Claire Warden, who many of you will know, who runs an outdoor kindergarten and all sorts of other things. She's quite a big name speaking about early years and outdoors. So that's in September. So do put that in your diaries, and we would love to see you there. But I think we're 1 minute over. So thank you all very much for joining us today, and thank you to all our speakers.